Good morning, or for many people, maybe it's good evening, good day, wherever you are, and welcome to our second briefing session for the festival with Dave Jarman, who is a university lecturer at Bristol and will tell you more about himself. I'd just like to say thanks very much, Dave, and go for it.
Marvellous. Thanks, Henry. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to see you again in many cases. Obviously, this is the second of our briefing sessions. So in the first session, we were talking about the sources of good ideas. And in this session, we're starting to think about actually, how do they potentially create value for other people? So one of the things we're going to be talking about kind of quite a lot in this morning session, or this evening session, wherever you happen to be in the world, is why do we need empathy? Why is empathy for others important when we're generating ideas? And again, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of making the right thing rather than making the thing right. I'm going to share a whole bunch of tools, and these will be available to you later this week after the session. We're going to talk a bit about what we mean by assumptions, why we have them and what we can do with them. And then again, we'll be talking about what you might do with some of the content and ideas from this session as you move forward thinking about the challenge. So there is a reason why we need empathy. And one of the biggest reasons we need empathy is because actually the single biggest reason that new ideas and new startups fail is because it transpires that nobody wants them. So if you can see the slide well enough, the single biggest reason that startups fail is that there is no market need. So basically, time and energy and love and goodwill has been lavished on an idea. And then it goes to market and people turn around and say, oh, I don't need that. I don't want that. I've got something better already. Or the thing that I've got isn't better than that, but you know what? It's cheaper and I know how to use it. And I know it works and all my friends use it. So why would I do something else? So there's a big barrier to the adoption of new ideas. And that's really about whether people kind of want them and need them. So some of you may recognize this. Many of you of a certain age will not. This is the Sinclair C5. And it actually dates back to 1985. And it was seen as a pioneering new way of getting around here in the UK. So you've got basically, there are pedals hidden in there. There's a handlebar underneath the knees and you'd cycle it around. And it's also got a battery, a little electric motor. And it was seen as a kind of a great new sustainable economic form of transport. And it completely died a death, despite the fact that it was built in high-tech factories. They had the Lotus car engineers build the chassis. They spent over 8 million in 1985 developing it. They also lost 8 million as well because nobody wanted it. That actually, the thing that's really missing from this whole picture is, imagine seeing one of those on the road next to a car. You'd be at the same height as the exhaust pipe. That car might not be able to see you because you're so low down. Don't forget, this is also a product that was launched in Britain. It rains quite a lot in Britain and there's no rain cover. So if they really expect, housewives to go and do their shopping in this thing, they might have thought some of these things through. So it's an amazing technical product, but users didn't want it for some blindingly apparent reasons, quite frankly, but were never picked up in the process. The story of the Sinclair C5 is well worth investigating further. However, the key thing here is that whatever your idea is, whatever your hunch is, whatever your sense of what the problem is, you need to go and validate that assumption. You need to get out of the building and go and test it out with people. Like, do you agree that this is a problem? Or how do you think about this problem? Or why is it a problem to you? And only then do you have something that's actually kind of. So we said in the previous session that innovation is not a linear process, that actually you move backwards as often as you move forward. So in this process of exploration and testing things out with people, sometimes you will kind of pitch ideas to people and they'll go, no, that's not how I think about it at all. Or that's not what I would want. Or actually, that's not the problem. The problem is actually this. But finding that stuff out early is so useful, so valuable, because it actually allows you to move forward more effectively over the longer term. So the first of the tools that I want to introduce today is a thing called the empathy map. Now, this is something that you can just tap into Google search and it will dig it out, or any other search engine that you choose to use. Others are available. But it's a really simple mechanism, and it just allows you to think about, well, actually, who is my user? And then we might think about, what are they trying to get done? What do they see? What do they say? What do they hear in their world? What are they trying to do? And what are they thinking and feeling? What sort of gains are they looking for? And pains are they feeling? And this just allows us to step into their shoes. So the first time you pick one of these up, you might just be scribbling on your guesses as to what you think your users or stakeholders might be thinking or feeling. But then, having written those down, you might go, actually, I know that some of these are really just guesses. So that's an opportunity to go and do some research, an opportunity to go and check, to validate. But the empathy map is just a nice tool for using at lots of stages in your journey to go, how well do I understand my user and what they're trying to do? Because just because you think it's a problem or you think it's a good idea, it doesn't mean that they do, and it doesn't mean that they use your language. And that's really important, because if you can anticipate their language, you're in a much better position to win them over with your arguments at a later stage, because you're going to be talking their language. So another way of visualizing and capturing this kind of understanding of your user is to do something that we call a journey map. Now, this is a tool that lots of designers use. You'll find lots of examples of journey maps if you look for them. What they all tend to do is break down the journey of a user as they experience a particular problem or they experience the use of a particular product or service. So from the moment they first think about it, to the moment they act on it, to the moment they go searching for it, to the moment they pick it up, to the moment they kind of put it down again. And what you're doing at each stage is you're trying to get a sense of what they might be thinking or doing and what they might be feeling. So what's their kind of emotional reaction to that piece? The one that you've got in front of you is, effectively a visit to the doctor and a visit to the pharmacist. And that's just one kind of linear journey through. But anyone's experience of almost any problem or service can be captured as a journey map. And again, it's just a good one to start with as a way of sketching out what you think you're trying to do. So if you're trying to look at some sort of big economic change in the world, think about who the actors are in that and think about what they're trying to get done. When and where do they encounter the problem? Who else do they talk to about it? What do they do about it? Where might you intervene or interact in that process to achieve something different? And again, these visualizations just help us map things out. So the third tool, I'm going to spend a little bit longer on this one, is what we call the value proposition canvas. And it consists, and again, this is easily searchable. All of the tools that I'm showing today are open source tools. What you've got here on the right-hand side is a user. And the user has a set of kind of characteristics, and you're trying to work out what they want to get done and what the gains and pains they might feel or they might want to be relieved of or achieve are. And then you've got the product offering or the service offering or the event or the activity or the organization that you're thinking of doing on the left-hand side. And what you're looking for, a bit like a Venn diagram, is you're looking for those two things to fit and to overlay. That the better your product or service or offering is compared to their needs, the more likely they are to want it, need it, and use it. If you're offering lots of things that they don't want or need, or if they've got lots of problems that you're not actually doing anything about, that's not going to fit. And it's not going to work, and it's not going to feel compelling. The closer the fit between what you offer and what people want, the more likely they are to adopt it, to use it, and to get impact from it. So breaking that down a little bit, on the user side, we might think about the customer, what the stakeholders' jobs. What are they trying to get done? And that might be a task. I want to travel from A to B. It might be that I want to have a certain social status. It might be that I want to be in a particular mood. I want to feel happier, or I want to feel relieved, or I want to feel calm, or I want to feel energized. Every product and service, every organization that we interact with is because we're trying to get something done. We're trying to make ourselves feel a particular way. We're trying to achieve a particular status. And these have got relative degrees of importance. But there's also gains. Also, in the process of getting that job done, there might be ways that that could be made better. We could feel really good about it. So this idea of required, expected, desired, unexpected, a good analogy that I like is you're waiting for a bus to turn up, and you've been told the bus should turn up every 20 minutes. So, turning up every 20 minutes is expected. You'd require it to turn up at least every 25, or you'd be upset. Desirable might be it turns up every 10 minutes. Unexpected might be it turns up every 5 minutes, and that'd be amazing. But after 25, after it gets out of what you really required, we're starting to talk about pains. We're starting to talk about things that you want to avoid. So just because a product or a service or organization helps you get something done, if the process of getting it done is so painful, so awkward, so socially stigmatizing, that actually it becomes not worth doing, and you won't get the job done because this isn't the best way to do it. So there's a piece here that is about what is the job to be done? What's the outcome that people are looking to achieve? And then gains and pains are about the process of getting it done. And can you make the process of getting it done better and more rewarding, or can you use it to relieve the pains and obstacles and awkwardness and inconsistencies that might also be present in that experience? So that idea of jobs to be done is really important. And what's really, really important here is that those jobs to be done are solution agnostic, that people need to get stuff done. And for the most part, they don't care how they do it, they just want it done. Now, as inventors, we have a habit of going, oh, but they want to do it like this, don't they? Not necessarily. If you're a car salesman, you might assume that everybody wants to get from A to B by selling a car. They could do that by bike. They could walk. They could use virtual conferencing tools to cover the distance between them and another person. They could put something in a post to get something from one place to another. Actually, it's really good to think about what is the job that people are trying to do and be agnostic about how you solve that at the start. On the other side, the bit that you might build are the things that you might do. So these might be tangible or intangible, and they might have degrees of relevance. You might create gains. These might be like better performance or more personalized or better savings or less wasteful, or they might be more usable. Every product or service you buy competes on a lot of these factors. And then there's pain relief as well. And how good are you at relieving people's pains? Does it just mitigate it, or does it actually fix it and solve it? So again, go back to this idea that you're overlaying these two parts. You've got what they want and you've got what you're going to make. And actually, again, this is a tool for guessing at the start, for scribbling things in that you think might be true and working out how they might come together. One way of framing this is to think about how your products, your services, your ideas are improving lives. Are they allowing things to grow? Do people get kind of more time and money, more happiness, more fulfillment? Are you making their days easier? Are you reducing things that they want reduced? And again, the post-pandemic period has thrown a lot of these ideas into quite sharp contrast. So again, thinking about how things have changed, how practices have changed from our last session, and thinking about, are there things that you can help your users grow, make easier, or shrink? So one way of pulling all of that together is what we call an Adlib. So you can see on here that elements of the value proposition canvas are kind of written in against the blanks, but our thing helps these people who want to do this thing by reducing something and increasing something else, unlike the existing things, the competitors and the alternatives. But a little framing statement like that makes your idea or the problem really easy to articulate and for other people to comment on and to feed back on. And it also, it's nice and simple. You can change it. You can swap ideas in and out of those blanks to see which are the most effective. So it's really, really, really flexible. So a lot of the tools, a lot of the ideas that I've talked about are going to be made available to you. We've got some kind of the PDFs of some of those canvases, but a lot of them you can find in some of these places. So there's a Harvard Business Review article on design thinking. All of these ideas are kind of drawn from the discipline of design thinking, and that's well worth a read if you want to find out a bit more. There are 2 really good sites that are just chock full of absolutely free methods for researching things, empathizing with people, understanding what people want. So Design Kit is developed by the US design firm IDEO, highly recommended. There's another one from an organization called Board of Innovation. They've got loads of tools. All of them are downloadable. Loads of them come with instructions. Lots of them come with video. Really useful to use. 2 other tools that I just want to mention quite quickly, partly because you might find them useful in the future. If you're trying to put ideas down and take notes, or you're trying to collaborate with others to share ideas, there's a couple of really good online kind of whiteboard tools that are really good for kind of putting post-it notes on and synthesizing, Mural and Millernote. And again, there's lots of free usage before you have to pay for anything. But have a look at those because they're really good kind of fun tools. I use them a lot for remote collaboration and doing research with colleagues, and we stick kind of virtual post-it notes up, and that's kind of really powerful. So kind of pulling some of this together, you're going to be making some big assumptions. Like when you start to think about empathizing with others, when you start to think about drawing out their journey maps, when you start to think about kind of building a value proposition, you're going to be making some big guesses about what people want, what they need, how they want it, where they want it, when they want it, how you should talk about it, how often they need it. You know, what are these hunches and guesses and approximations and statements? And are they based at the moment on weak or limited evidence? So you might want to dig out more evidence, and that could be secondary research, or you could be doing primary research. You could be going talking to people. Which are the biggest guesses? Which are the wobbliest pillars in your model? Like if you say, hey, we're going to do this, and that's built on some really unsecure foundations, I would be testing those as a priority and trying to validate or invalidate them as quickly as you can. So the week 1 challenge was doing your research. So finding some problems and opportunities, building those spare parts, but then also thinking about how you might empathize with others to gain insights and to draw that content together. So before I launch into the Q&A, the big piece next the big piece in next week's first session will be generating ideas that will.
Sorry, Alison, can you switch your camera off because you're on stage?
The first thing we'll be doing next week is drawing together a lot of the insights and data that you've been able to gather this week, a lot of the attempts to kind of create empathy that you'll have kind of looked at, and then we're going to move on to generating ideas. So we're still very much in our explore phase, still very much generating research, and actually the next stage will be, you know, bringing those together and actually shaping some ideas. So, any questions or queries? If you want to use the Q&A over on the right-hand side and stick things in there, we'll be more than happy to try and field them.
Can you unshare your screen and then... Brilliant. That's great. Yes, can you not use the chat? Definitely use the questions and then we can see it. Okay, we've got a first question.
Solutions being solution agnostic, policy innovation or policymaker solution agnostic. No, this is one of the challenges that I think a lot of the time policymakers are not necessarily solution agnostic. They have got an ideology that they're working to. But I think when we're generating ideas, we need to start with the problem, not the solution. because this can be quite polarizing, coming in with a very clear, well, no, I think it should be done like this, can instantly put the backs up of the people that you're trying to influence. But if you come in going, right, look, we all agree that this is a problem, and think about how we frame this problem and how we talk about this problem. And if you can get agreement that actually you are talking about the same problem in the same way, then when you go to talk about solutions, actually maybe you just open that up a little bit more, and there are some more options to talk about. Henry, you're more of a policy.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, because when people use the word ideology, what do they mean, I suppose, is an interesting question, because there may be assumptions and beliefs about how the world make the world a better place. So I suppose if your ideology is a free market, then you start with the solution, that your idea that all solutions really are about creating better markets. And I suppose if you're your supposition actually is by involving more people or getting the community going, you might focus on that. But in a way, it's almost impossible, I would say, to not have some presuppositions about how the world works, because even if you cannot start from scratch and go out and discover how the world works, everyone has presuppositions. And I suppose it's just how narrow those are, or how wide they are, how blinkered and really, this is always the answer, or open to different ideas you are. But ultimately, you're not going to research whether bringing people on board and engaging with them to go somewhere and trying to be diverse and get everyone in. Now, you might call that an ideology, but you're probably not going to change that. There might be some circumstances, I suppose, when people aren't going to engage at all, maybe. But I mean, I don't think you can start for totally a blank sheet. What do you think, Dave?
And to be honest, I mean, in a sense, the importance of these tools is to understand what's on people's sheets of paper, even as they get started. I've heard this discussed as, basically none of us see reality. We all see reality through a filter. We all have a map of the world. And on each of our maps of the world, we choose to highlight particular kind of contours or features. Some of us have kind of almost the geographic map of the world. Some of us have the kind of the political map of the world. And we look for different features. Understanding other people helps us understand what is on their map. Yeah. So actually those conversations help us go, oh, you want to talk about this like this. Oh, you talk about this with this kind of assumption in mind. Right, okay. And that either means that we then know how to talk to them about it, and we can work with their map of the world, or we know we have to do some work unpicking their map of the world before we can have that conversation. But again, this really highlights to me why empathy is so important. That, if we come in going, hey, this, and they're going, whoa, no, we talk about it like this, I think you'll find we're going to butt heads. Whereas if we can at least go, right, I know that you want to talk about it like this, so I'm going to think about how I work around that, or I'm going to think about how I use my language, so that you don't see this as necessarily kind of scary or intimidating, or that I can give you a way to work with it. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think language, Dave, I mean, as you said, is so important, because some language really people don't relate to and dislike. And actually this, I think, relates to the next question. What are some best ways to test your assumptions? Actually, the first thing is, actually, most of us don't know what our assumptions are. Because they're just, they're the sea or the air we breathe. And so it comes back to your point that actually talking to other people suddenly helps you realize what assumptions are. And I think, the diversity of people you talk to is key, because if you just talk to everyone who thinks like you, they'll all have exactly the same assumptions. But it's interesting, actually.
And then you wonder why they do things that you don't agree with. Like, I work in a university. I'm surrounded largely by kind of sort of, I guess, left-wing progressive thinkers. And then I always wonder why the country seems to vote in conservative governments. But that's because the group of people that I talk to isn't diverse enough. And actually, one of the things that you should do, like if you read kind of the newspapers on the left, occasionally you should go and read the newspapers on the right, just to find out the language they use, the things that they talk about, so that actually, if you want to persuade them, you start in some of their language, because actually they're not attuned to your language. So just in that kind of testing assumptions, just to build on that, yeah, it's talking to other people. We are going to talk more about testing and prototyping when we get through to week 3, and I'll share some more specific methods about kind of testing and prototyping then. But the single most important thing that you can do is talk to other people, even when your idea is totally half-formed, because actually at that point it's cheap. And if somebody says, no, I don't agree with that, or here's a different version of it, it's easy for you to put down. It's inexpensive for you to put down because you're not invested in it. If you've spent months and years working on something where it's so precious to you, and then somebody says, you know what, I don't want that in blue, I want it in pink, you're going to be furious and annoyed and frustrated. So actually, the best ways to test is to get sharing as soon as you can. And that might be just saying it out loud, it might be chatting to a group of people, it might be drawing a sketch, it might be kind of sharing an article about something and asking for feedback. But think about low-cost ways to get your assumptions out there so people can feed back on them readily. Yeah. And try and make it as non-confrontational as you can. So you're asking for their opinion, or you're asking for them to kind of contribute to something, rather than saying, hey, I've got this idea, good or bad, because you could be setting people. Lots of people don't like telling you that you're wrong. So in entrepreneurship, we sometimes refer to this as the mum test. And basically, if you said to your mum, is this a good idea? Of course, your mum's probably going to say, yes, that's a brilliant idea, because they want to like you and they don't want to offend you and they want to care for you. Actually, you almost need to talk to a stranger, somebody who might not worry about potentially offending you, and saying, you know, what do you think of this? So share sketches, drawings, 1 or 2 sentences, examples. Yeah, just get it out there and see how people respond.
And I think, Dave, it's really interesting how that is counter to the standard expert culture. And we always have this problem that people go off and do deep research and analyze and come up with a set of answers, and they don't want to talk to anyone, but until they've actually got it all worked out and got deep into it and come up with their conclusions, and they've got their detailed recommendations. It's like, hey, wait a moment. And there's nothing like that to put people off.
No, and that's it. If you come in with a big kind of fully finished, fully polished, people kind of often they're either reticent to try and tear it down, either they don't feel that they've had long enough to look at it to give you any sensible criticism, or they are going to have to really tear it up and you're going to be upset by that process. So one of the bits of advice I often give is, you know, go and share your ideas quite soon, quite quickly. But think about maybe finding an expert in a subject matter to go, right, what about this? And seeing what that expert makes of it, because they may well tear it down quite quickly. But if that happens early, if that happens on day 1 rather than day 101, you've saved a lot of time and effort. So in startup culture, we talk about this as fast failure. And how do you embrace failure so that you make lots of little cheap failures rather than big catastrophic failures after 100 days of working on something and only then sharing?
Now, the next question, was it web whiteboard? Now, I presume that was the virtual
the tools that yeah, so I mentioned a couple of tools, Mural and Millernote, as good online, basically they're kind of like online whiteboards, and you can put post-it notes up and you can write on them and you can drop documents and pictures and draw things on them. They basically do anything a kind of regular whiteboard does, but with more digital linkage through. Mural, Millernote. I've got links to them actually in the 3rd session that I'm going to be running next Tuesday. And they're just tools that I use quite a lot with my team to kind of kick ideas around. But there are others, I'm sure. Ooh, we're missing the end of this sentence here. My advice to someone who's in a creative occupation. Whoever wrote that, I'd really like to see the end of the question, because
yeah, if you just add whoever it was, put in, does this person have to give up some?
I'm curious to know what you think you have to give up. Initial hunch is probably
just
not.
add it in the last one, and we'll count it towards that. Maybe just cover the great resources.
Yeah, so we will be, there's a load of handout material created by the company Strategizer, who made both the value proposition canvas and another thing called the business model canvas that you might have heard of. And we're going to try and get those up on the site later this week. The design kit site and the Board of Innovation site are really good, and there's loads of free downloadable stuff there, lots of kind of PDF and handouts to kind of print off and write on and scribble on. To be honest, typing some of those terms like value proposition, empathy map, user journey map into search engine, you will find lots and lots of examples and lots and lots of downloadable things. And to be honest, you can hand draw most of these things. Lots of those online sharing tools like Mural and Milanote actually come pre-populated with templates that include things like user journey maps and value proposition canvases, because they're such industry standards now. Brilliant.
And we've got the end of it. It was something. Does this person have to give up something? What would you advise to someone who is a creative occupation? Someone who's over a long time been developing a particular skill.
Don't give up anything. I think you do need to think about, if you're thinking of yourself as a creative, as almost as if you are the product or you are the service. I think the critical thing is finding out who finds what you know how to do valuable. There's a tool called the Personal Business Model Canvas that might be worth a little look. And one of the things that it does is it helps you think about how you articulate the value that you create. So as a creative, you make stuff and you know how to make stuff. So it might be that it's the fruits of your work, your output, your kind of creative makings that are the valuable thing. But equally, it might be the fact that you know how to make things, and people might find your skill set useful. And then it's just it's identifying who finds that valuable. Now, there is a decision here. How far away from what you want to do you have to pivot before you find people who are willing to pay you to do it? And that might be a sacrifice you're willing to make, or it might be one that you're not. And fundamentally, lots of creatives have careers in which they do something to make the money, and then they use the money to spend the time doing the thing that they love. And that is an entirely personal decision to make. What you can't do is make people want the things that you want to make. That doesn't work.
Dave, this next question is a really interesting one, I think, because I suppose a lot of your models, a lot of business, if you're coming from more a business perspective, you sort of take the world as a given, i.e. you go out and say, this is what people want and so forth. But actually, if you're a campaigner and trying to change it, you're actually trying to reframe, get people to rethink what they want, what they want to do, how the world is, and so on. And so you're not trying to respond to the status quo and serve it, if you like. You're trying to radically change the status quo. So how does that change the sort of models that you need to look at? So it's a very different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's about going back to what the problem is. So rather than thinking in terms of solutions and thinking in terms of traditional solutions, it's going back and looking at the problem and going, well, actually, is there a different way to solve this? And actually, if you can convince people that the problem is big enough, urgent enough, painful enough, actually, people will turn around and think differently. But you have to get them. It's a process of making the pain big enough that they have to move, and making the new activity easy enough for them to do that they can kind of get over the inertia and they can get over the barrier. But somewhere between those 2 points of making it painful enough and easy enough, actually most people can be moved. But the issue here is that you can't change their mind. They have to change their own mind. All you can do is assemble the evidence that helped change your mind and assemble it in such a way that actually it can influence them. And some people are just very, very difficult to convert. And it might be that you need government to pull a big lever to make people do stuff, but then equally that can create a backlash. So just look at the furor about masks at the moment, and whether people like to be told what to do by the nanny state, or whether actually, if enough people are setting a good example, people want to do that. So again, just because it's current reading, I mentioned it the other day, Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, really good book. And this is a company who are doing things really differently. And there's some great stuff in here about the philosophies that they've adopted. And I found myself reading it going, no, you're right, actually. You know, we should be repairing and fixing our clothes, not just buying new clothes. So if you assemble the evidence in a compelling enough way, actually, I think you can change habits.
Yeah. Well, I think, Dave, what's interesting is because if there's a lot of possible pain, one very human response to this is denial, isn't it? Because especially if it's scary and big and feels out of control. I mean, climate change is obviously the classic one. And a lot of people, a lot of us, myself, everyone, is deeply in denial about this. And it's very interesting to see the sorts of techniques that XR are sort of developing of trying to open up conversations, because quite often, although people are in denial, somewhere lurking underneath are some worries and concerns, but they don't want to talk about it, or and how you sort of open that up.
A lot of what XR have done is they've made it immediately painful to people, because they've gotten in their face with it. They've interrupted people's daily lives with this news and gone, no, you can't ignore this anymore. No, you need to talk to me about it, or you need to face this down. You need to have an opinion. And that will help some people go, no, you're right. Actually, I need to read this stuff. I need to re-educate myself. Like, there's been a lot of kind of re-education. A lot of white people have been thinking about, how do I re-educate myself about the kind of Black Lives Matter movement? And it forces a moment of engagement. Now, inevitably, some people don't want to be forced into that moment. And, you know, you see vitriolic opposition to Black Lives Matter, to Extinction Rebellion, to a lot of these things. But actually, an awful lot of people are being won over and are educating themselves and are changing their minds. And I think, you know, we are seeing a progressive trend kind of coming through, even if actually we get these moments of backlash and resistance.
But it's interesting there's a chicken and egg thing here, isn't there? Because people sort of match their opinions and views to what they do, don't they? So some people say if you get people doing things, then they'll take on the value set that's associated with the actions, rather than trying to change people's minds and then get them to do things. So the sort of idea there is that if people do some recycling, and that's not difficult, they're a recycler. And if you're a recycler, well, you're an environmentalist. And then what else do you do as an environmentalist? And they begin to, their idea and their value and where they are changes, and actually the actions lead rather than the mindset. The mindset follows the actions rather than the actions following the mindset. So I think there may be a balance between those two things, but I think there's a lot of evidence that people adopt values that suit what they feel able to be, in a sense.
Yeah, and actually there's a really good piece of work. There's a book called The Common Cause Handbook, and I can't remember for the life of me who created it, but The Common Cause Handbook it was called. And it talks a lot about this idea of kind of shared and communal values. And they did some research that sort of showed that if you hold certain types of value, you are also likely to hold adjacent types of value. So if you kind of have an interest in environmentalism, you're also likely to have some interest in things like social justice and similar. But there are also kind of then almost opposed values that if you hold one type of value, you're unlikely to hold another. If you are in that sort of space about thinking about kind of cause-based problems and solutions, the Common Cause Handbook might be, I think it's entirely freely available online, might be worth a look, because you might find some values that you can talk about. Because there is a big issue here about people's self-identification. And it goes back to that idea of almost carrot and stick. Like, how do you either make it easy for people to identify by saying, hey, you already do this, you could do this. And equally stick saying, you can't do that anymore, you have to do this. And for certain of us at certain points, both of those methods have a degree of validity. That there isn't a silver bullet to this stuff. It's difficult. It's very, very human. And it goes back to one of the things I sort of said in the previous session about, for big issues, how do you start small? Like if you're going to eat an elephant, you do it a mouthful at a time. Sorry, that's a horrible analogy in a situation. But anyway, you get my point. It's, if you want to do something about social justice, how might you do that in a particular niche for a particular group of people, and find something that works and makes a difference there, and then scale? Coming up with very grand solutions to things is really problematic, because you're trying to be too many things to too many people, and you're going to get too much resistance, especially if you don't have the resources to do anything at that scale. So thinking about how you can chew on kind of smaller pieces that will build up, to use a slightly different example, when Amazon started, they were just doing books, but in the name that they chose, Amazon, they were conjuring the idea of something big. And if you look, there's that arrow that joins the A and the Z. They were right from the start, they were like, we're going to be the A to Z of everything that you can buy online. That vision of what they wanted to be was there, even when they were just doing books. Okay. But they were so almost having a structure that would allow them to scale to other things. And whilst you might not want to be Amazon, you could borrow that idea of having a big vision, but taking small steps.
Dave, I thought I might bring Sina onto the stage, because she's asked this question about innovation, and get a response from her on what she thinks of what we've said and further questions that she might have. Hopefully she'll join us in a moment. Cool. Maybe while she's coming, that you might talk about the Lindsay's question about other resources, and I think we've said that resources will be available later, and we'll let you know where they are. And
if other people have got suggestions, by all means stick them in the Q&A. Obviously let Henry and the team know, and we'll kind of circulate those as well. I was conscious I only had about sort of 20 minutes this morning, rather than kind of bombard you with all the possibles. It was kind of really getting across the value of empathizing, the value of co-creation, the value of working with others to design and develop solutions. That for me is the super important thing. But there's lots of organizations that are doing this, and it's well worth working with those and thinking about those.
Sina doesn't seem to be able to join us, so let's move on to Deborah on policy innovation again. When there isn't consensus.
I think it's trying to build consensus. I'm trying to think of a specific example.
Yeah. Well, while you're thinking, I'll give mine, because actually we're doing some work on this around management of a catchment, and we're using a particular tool actually to do it, where basically you get all the different people, different stakeholders in the catchment who have different perspectives on what the problem is in the catchment, what needs to be done, and so forth, and just actually get them out on the table. But in particular, get them out on the table anonymously, because people quite often don't say things because they're worried about the reaction, or they might insult and so forth. And someone's opinion might be, well, all the bloody farmers, they're ruining the whole thing. And why do they think that? And begin to, once you get them out there, and then you can actually get people to, what we're going to do is see, to what extent do people agree or disagree with everyone else? And you can then begin to map where the real differences of opinion are, which may be due to issues of trust, maybe issues of evidence, different perspectives on what the problem is, and so on. But only when you've actually got to the real nitty-gritty of where the differences are, can you begin to work through and find a way of bringing people together. And because a lot of things might be just different beliefs, different assumptions, all sorts of stuff could underlie it. Unless you start digging in, you can't really work out what is actually going on.
I think that's a really important point there, kind of, I think pulling identity and hierarchy out of this sometimes really helps. Like as a slightly kind of different piece, I've done a lot of kind of senior leadership kind kind of training events in the university sector for a number of years. And when individuals from different universities have badges on that say their rank at their university and their university's name, suddenly people start deferring to other people. People start going, oh, you do a more senior job, but at a less prestigious institution. And they start listening to each other in different ways. When they just have a badge on that says Dave or Henry, actually, and they don't know the rest of that detail, you get a much more open conversation. So actually, a lot of it is about how you frame the context in which the ideas come together, in which the participants come together. And if you can kind of pull away some of the traditions and the hierarchies and the kind of frameworks, actually you can get a more open discussion. Some people are very, very status oriented, for better or for worse.
This is interesting. Well, because this is, has the pandemic made any difference? I mean, actually, is there evidence? I wonder if people have actually looked at this. I mean, there's obviously loads of articles about this and lots of propositions and so forth, but I'm not aware of any really systematic assessment.
I think it depends on the context you're in. So, for example, in the university that I work in, we liked teaching in physical classrooms, and people would have sworn blind that that was the only way and the best way to do what we do. And now that we're all doing it online, actually, a lot of us are going, you know what, this is better, and this is opportune. So whilst that might feel very niche, I think a lot of processes have been interrupted. I think people have been knocked out of their ruts, and we do have a window in which they are doing something different, and they are not allowed to do what they usually do, to kind of seize the agenda before they just go back and climb back into the rut, because the rut is very comfortable. So I think that's going to be very specific from industry area to industry area and policy area to policy area. But I think we will find examples where people just can't do what they used to do.
Brilliant. Lindsay, actually, maybe we could just get Lindsay up to I'll be interested in her thoughts as to whether there's difference. Lindsay, can you just put your camera and microphone on?
Actually, just very quickly, the Real Ideas organisation, which is what I think Lindsay's representing here, are an amazing organisation who do incredible stuff and are well worth checking out.
So there's an introduction for you, Lindsay. But I'd be interested if you want to if you put your camera, there you go.
Am I on? Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah,
Hi.
thank you for the intro, Dave. That's very kind.
So I was just thinking, Lindsay, you said there are good models of collaborative co-production. I mean, in terms of the sorts of models that Dave was talking about, how different are they, would you say, in terms of how they work?
I think the sort of, probably the big difference is, and I completely get it, Dave, we use all the sort of stuff you're talking about as well. But I suppose it's that idea that sometimes I think we believe that we have to come with something a bit more formed. And a lot of the work that we've done, particularly with young people, is really to say, let's work with you every single step of the way. So how do we go on the journey of perhaps we're meeting with a group of young people living in a particular community, and what we're trying to do is to involve them in the process of not just identifying the problem, but of actually then working through their experiences, and through their experiences to sort of iterate something which then as a product or a service can be successful. And so it's very much the sort of fundamentals of what you're talking about, but it's I guess more of a sort of constant relationship rather than something which is a bit like I come up with something, I test it, I refine it, I go back. It's more of a let's actually do this really together. And what then happens is that as well as evolving a product or a service, you also then upskill a group of people who become incredibly passionate about it. So you have this amazing bunch of advocates, but also who then to some extent start to solve a whole other set of problems that they perhaps are living with. And I suppose that's the bit which I find, in the context of building back better and sort of something a bit more radical, that's what's really exciting. You know, you can change the context as well as ending up with some form of entrepreneurial service, I guess.
And just to build on that, I think the idea that you not only provide the tools, but the confidence to solve one problem actually gives them the tools and confidence to solve multiple problems.
Yeah, so absolutely. Actually, yeah.
I work with an organisation called Knoll West Media Centre in Bristol.
Fabulous.
I'm sure you're well aware of.
Them. Yeah.
And kind of using some of the RSAs, kind of student and pupil design award materials to teach students how to use a kind of a design sprint methodology, not unlike the one that we're kind of sharing with this program, so that actually they've got a method so that at any point in the future when they bump into something, they go, you know what, I know how I could try and tackle this. I know how to structure these conversations. So it's not something that happens to them. It's something that happens with them and through them.
Exactly. We have a sort of favourite example, which was a young man called Billy, who lives in Redruth in West Cornwall, and he hadn't left his bedroom for 7 years. You know, all sorts of quite significant mental health issues. And he, in working with him, he was a great gamer, great online gamer. That's how he lived his life. And in working with him to start thinking about entrepreneurial ideas, what he was trying to do was use his gaming knowledge, which was extensive, but also deal with the fact that he did want to get out of his bedroom. He wanted to understand how to overcome all of that. So what he ended up doing was actually developing a sort of face-to-face confidence building game, I guess is what you call it, this was pre-COVID, he invited, you know, groups of people to come and sit around the table and play a game. And the game that they invented was all about how do you build confidence, and it was quite bizarre. It actually went viral. We had this sort of amazing moment where it got picked up by the local news, and I suddenly got messages from friends, you know, on the other side of the world saying, "What's going on?" And it was really interesting. So he ended up with something which was his enterprise and a methodology. He also, in the process, moved himself a long way, and lots of the people he worked with, and which is brilliant. So yeah, there definitely is. It's quite a radical solution if you can get it working.
And that's partly that piece about, you know, being focused on the problem and being focused on a user and what they can do and what they can bring to it, rather than sort of saying, well, there's this big ephemeral thing in the distance. How do we do that? It's like, well, where are you and what have you got and what do you need to deal with? And start from there, and it can build and grow.
Absolutely. And also be prepared to constantly give it away. One of the best pieces of advice I had from somebody 20 years ago was, whenever you have ideas, don't hold on to them. Don't get caught up in this protecting your IP thing. You know, actually constantly give things away. And actually, I have absolutely found over the years that by doing that, you gain more, because you gain connections, partnerships, interest, and you know, so it really works. So I think I'd really recommend be a little bit careful about that mindset, which is, oh God, I've got to keep everything secret because somebody will steal my idea.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Lindsay. That's great. If you switch your camera and microphone off, you'll leave us back onto the floor.
So there's a couple of questions that if we can get to very quickly. The democratic deficit, working with elected officials, I'm going to have to be very, to be honest, they're just like every other person. They've got a map of the world, they've got an agenda, they've got sensitivities, they've got a particular language. You need to talk to them and find out what they're trying to get done, because they will have optics, they will have a perspective on this, and the better we understand that, the more likely we are to work with kind of community groups who want to challenge things. Some of them will be quite entrenched, not all of them. I'm a town councillor. I was quite surprised when I joined the town council, thinking that it might be quite set in its ways. I was really surprised at the number of people who were not set in their ways, but they needed help and support and language to articulate things differently.
Just to add to that, as a civil servant, you know, there is a standard thing that as a civil servant you need to involve and hear and bring to the attention of ministers the diversity of views. And good policy is based on hearing and involving a diversity of views. So that is an angle, and any civil servant who also wants positive outcomes can use that to involve people. So if you create relationships with say civil servants with more empathy towards your perspectives, they should be able to bring you into the system within the status quo rules. So it should be possible.
Just to pick up the legal one very quickly, it entirely depends. So doing something better than someone else, in principle, is perfectly fine. What you shouldn't do is copy anything that is protected. So obviously, logos, trademarks, if there are, patents on scientific mechanical processes, if they've got any design rights over the look and feel of a thing, or they've got any copyright on the text, you can't just take what they've done and do it again using all of their words and all of their images and all of their tools necessarily. But a lot of the methodology that they might have used is probably not protected. Lots of processes that are not scientific or mechanical are not protected. So you just need to do a little bit of research into whether anything that they've been doing is protected by any form of intellectual property. And the other issue, obviously, you just need to think about whether you're going to offend them or anyone else in simply kind of taking it and doing it better. I would always encourage, a bit of research and a bit of collaboration rather than just going, I can do this better. Right. I'm going to have to disappear in a moment, just to let you know.
Okay. I'll do the chicken and egg. We're running out of time anyway. What is the best way to introduce change and innovation then? Where to begin? Well, actually, you have to do both and is the general rule. But be aware that for some people, it might be easier to get people starting to do things and then bring the value proposition along with them rather than try and convince them, especially if they're in a totally different space altogether. To change people's perspectives and show them the pain. I mean, people don't want it, but could be hugely resistant. Whereas showing them something they can do, getting to meet other people with different values that link to that, will pull them through. And suddenly at the end of it, they're an environmentalist. Actually, watch Mrs. America, because it's very interesting, because one of the things that the feminist side say, there was a great statement to the resistors to the Equal Rights Amendment in the US, was she asked them, so what have you learned? And they said, oh yeah, we've learned to do budgets, etc., etc. And she said, well, you've now become a working girl, haven't you? And so, so they are actually become what they're trying to resist becoming. And it's showed how one person then values changed because of actually her experiences in a radical way. But
I think the trick is to get started. And if you can get started quickly and cheaply and easily, and you can fail and then try something else without any kind of real loss of kind of time and energy and reputation, great.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. That was absolutely brilliant. And we will now go to the workshop, and I'm going to just stop the presentation mode for a moment, and then we'll do an introduction. We'll have a 2-minute break or 5-minute break, just a comfort break, and get a glass of water or whatever you want, and then we'll give an introduction to the workshop. Okay, see you in a moment. Thanks very much. Bye.